Hey everybody, it's Chris. Got a new interview for you today with Limor Goren. She is a doctor. She is a researcher. She is a cancer researcher, actually. She has a PhD in molecular biology. Her research centers on one of the most important anti-inflammatory molecules found in olive oil. If you've been following me for a while, you know this is called oleocanthal. I talk about it in my first book. I talk about it in my cookbook. Oleocanthal is the anti-cancer compound in olive oil, at least one of them, and maybe the most important one. Dr. Goren discovered one of the mechanisms by which oleocanthal is toxic to cancer and showed that olive oils that are rich in oleocanthal are an effective strategy to kill various types of cancer cells. And not all olive oil has high levels of oleocanthal. In fact, some olive oils basically don't have any at all. So we'll talk about all that. Dr. Goren, thank you for taking the time to do this.
Oh, thank you so much, Chris, for having me on the show. I was looking forward to talking to you for a long time. Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
So how did you get into olive oil? How did you decide
Mhm.
to research this molecule or this, I started with a food
Yeah,
product.
right. It pretty much fell on my desk, on my lab bench, quite literally. I was working on my PhD and I was working in a cancer lab at a research university at Hunter College in New York City. And our lab centered on a cellular mechanism called the mTOR pathway, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And we're looking at upstream signals that activate the mTOR pathway, which is very often dysregulated in cancer.
And
And
before we move on,
mhm.
would you explain the significance of the mTOR pathway to my
Oh,
audience?
sure, sure. So mTOR is a master regulator of growth and proliferation. Um, Kind of the cellular doorman
Yeah.
or cellular control center that gets signals from different nutrients. So it tells the cell whether it has sufficient proteins, whether the cell has sufficient nucleic acids in order to grow and proliferate. So as you can imagine, a protein that is in the center of that is often a target of tumors, of cancer, because if they can hijack those signalings and convince cells that's not supposed to divide and proliferate, that they should divide and proliferate, you get a tumor.
So is it correct to say that mTOR dysregulation is a driver of cancer? Is that it?
Very often so. Very often so. And in
Certain
fact,
types.
um, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it's every cancer, but one aspect or another of the mTOR pathway, any enzymes or proteins upstream of it or downstream of it are very often dysregulated in cancer. And in fact, I listened to one of your previous episodes when you talked about fasting, and I'm all in favor of that. And in essence, when you fast, what you do is you send signals to mTOR to shut off. So fasting kind of mimics inhibition of mTOR. So many times in case of cancer, what we're looking for as researchers are ways to inhibit mTOR versus activate it. But often cancers overactivate mTOR.
And for anyone that doesn't know, mTOR means mammalian target of rapamycin, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, correct.
Which is a drug, rapamycin.
Um, yeah, it's interesting. It's a little bit backwards, right? So first, the drug was found, or compound was found in Easter Islands back in the 80s, and they didn't know what it does. And using that compounds on cells, then they discovered the enzyme that this drug inhibits, and that enzyme happened to be mTOR, and they just called it mammalian target of rapamycin, for lack of a better name.
Yep. So you have a body part named after a drug.
Pretty much.
Yeah, it seems, yeah,
Yeah,
it's like the cart before the horse almost. Okay,
yeah,
so
doesn't make a lot of sense.
so you were researching mTOR and looking for compounds or molecules that would influence it in some way, right?
Mhm. And then one of our lab collaborators, a researcher named Paul Breslin from Rutgers University, sent us this compound that was recently discovered and characterized and was found to be a very strong anti-inflammatory molecule called oleocanthal. It was isolated from olive oil. It's the compound in olive oil that gives some olive oil the stinging sensation in the back of your throat when you taste them, when you eat them, when you drink them. I always take a spoon of olive oil, so I feel that stinging sensations every day. And that sting comes from oleocanthal because it also activates some taste buds that we have in the back of the throat. And that's why it feels a little bit of bitter, slightly spicy sensation when we taste oleocanthal. And
So
by the way, that's a really great way of telling whether your olive oil has oleocanthal or not.
if you have olive oil and you take a little spoonful of it, a little sip of it, and it doesn't produce that little spiciness in the back of your throat, you know it's relatively weak in terms of oleocanthal, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, correct. Or might not be olive oil at all.
That's right. Yeah, you know, I've shared information on this, and we don't have to go down that rabbit hole. But yeah, there have been you know, several independent studies on major olive oil brands and how diluted they are, and or just completely counterfeit. It's not even olive oil in there. So yeah, okay. So you got they sent you this oleocanthal molecule to do some bench work with. And what was discovered?
So, first of all, the most interesting thing was that it initially we tested it on cells in a dish. And what we noticed was that it causes really rapid cell death that I have not seen with any other compound. You know, the compounds you throw bleach at cancer cells that it would kill them, it would kill anything. But as far as organic, natural compounds, it caused very rapid cell death. You could see it with your eyes in a microscope. You didn't have to do any kind of fancy assays. And that was interesting because mostly when we work with cancer cells, we always think about apoptosis as a mode of death. And apoptosis takes some time to achieve. It's actually a pathway that involves several reactions that have to happen in a certain timeline. But this was much faster. Something was happening to those cells that made them almost die from the inside out. And that was interesting. And that is one of the first things I said to figure out what's happening there, what's killing the cell, how does oleocanthal kill the cells? And again, I'm not saying it happens with every cell or not even with every cancer cell, but what we found is that it affects a very important organelle inside the cells. We all have in every cell in our body, we have these organelles called lysosomes. And lysosomes often are referred to as the recycling centers of the cells, but they're much more than that. Basically, for cells that are in an environment where they are very poorly vascularized, as is the case with many tumors, especially in the early stage before they get blood vessels feeding them, the cells need a way of getting nutrients, and they don't have that way of getting nutrients. So what happens is they recycle internal components that are not necessary anymore of the cells in their lysosome through a process called autophagy. And very often, autophagy is a survival signal for cells, for cancer cells. So often with chemotherapy, when some tumors become resistant to chemotherapy, the reason for that is because they activate their autophagic pathways and are able to survive. They're able to exclude those toxins from the cellular environment because lysosome can shuttle some materials out of the cell, and they're able to use nutrients that already exist in the cell for survival. So when we target lysosomes, as we found that oleocanthal does, it really targets lysosome and poke holes in them. It makes them not very effective anymore. It affects cancer cells much more than normal cells, because normal cells, they still need the lysosomes, but not as much as some cancer cells do.
And so even in the lab, putting this directly on cell cultures or whatever, what was the effect on healthy cells? Did it kill healthy cells at all?
Not in the same concentrations. You need a concentration maybe 15, 20 times higher in order to start affecting healthy cells, which is what you want when you look at compounds that you can use to fight cancer. You're looking for the differential. If it only took double the amount to kill healthy cells, that wouldn't be very interesting. But there's a really big differential between the dose that killed cancer cells and the dose that killed healthy cells.
Yeah, that's really important. And you mentioned bleach earlier. It's like, yeah, bleach kills cancer cells in the lab, and if you drink bleach, it'll kill cancer cells. But bleach is like chemo.
Yeah,
You're gonna kill a lot of healthy cells if you drink some bleach.
I agree. And unfortunately, for many patients, sometimes oncologists prescribe things that are like almost as bad as bleach.
That's right. No, I've spent a lot of time researching and talking about that for sure. And chemotherapy drugs and everyone knows they're highly toxic. And so
Yeah.
that's why it's so exciting to see that there are compounds in nature, in plants, in food that are anti-cancer. And so, what was the next step for you? Did you continue researching more, or what did you learn? You know, after the
So
first sort of initial discovery of
so
this.
after that, I have to say something really interesting and beautiful happened. Um, I received an email from a small producer of olive oil in Greece, um, telling me that they heard about our research through some collaborators in Athens, and they're makers of olive oil, and their olive oil was found to have the highest level of oleocanthal ever found in any olive oil at that time. That was about 7 or 8 years ago. And they asked if I'm interested in getting some their olive oil to use it in research. And I said yes, but to be honest, I was thinking to myself, what am I going to do with olive oil? I'm a serious scientist. I wear a white lab coat. I work with pipettes and reagents that I order from, chemical companies and pharmaceutical companies. Yes, olive oil is great. It's food, but what kind of interesting scientific discoveries um, can be found in there? And that's where I was terribly wrong. And I'm really happy that I decided to do something with that olive oil they sent me, because I felt bad. They sent me a case of olive oil, and I'm like, geez, I have to do something with it. So I designed a very simple experiment to test the power of the olive oil in affecting cancer cells. So we grow cancer cells in a Petri dish with some buffer that's mainly water and some salts. So it doesn't mix very well with olive oil. So it was a little bit of a challenge. How would I try olive oil in those cancer cells? Later on, when we work with animal models, it's a little easier. But for the cancer cells, I was like, how would I give them olive oil? And then I was thinking about my background in cooking in the kitchen. Like, I know how to make vinaigrette. You need an emulsifier and you shake it vigorously. And that's exactly what I did. I took some olive oil and I spun it and I shook it until I knew I could mix it really well with the buffer that the cancer cells needed. And I treated a couple of plates of cancer cells of different ones, some prostate cancer and some breast cancer cells with that olive oil mixture. And I went home to my family. I came back in the morning and all the cells were dead. So the first thought I had in my head, oh, well, maybe it's like bleach, something you put olive oil on cells, it killed them. So I went down to the supermarket during my lunch break and I picked up a very generic bottle of olive oil. And I repeated the same experiment with that olive oil from the supermarket. I went home, fed dinner to my kids, came back to the lab the next morning, and lo and behold, those cells were as happy as I left them the previous night. So there is something very, very different and very special in that olive oil that came to me all the way from Greece, from these two brothers that made the olive oil with the most oleocanthal versus the olive oil I got in the supermarket. And that's when I knew that I have something there. And that's when I knew there's a very interesting story hiding in those plain facts. And I went on goose chase, and I collected probably something like 50 or 60 different olive oils from all parts of the world. And I compare them in their ability to simply kill cancer cells in a dish. And I started ranking them and seeing which olive oils were better at killing cancer cells and which olive oils were not. And after I did that, I got, somewhat of a graph that shows me which olive oils were better. Then I sent all of these olive oils for an analysis in a lab that measures via NMR spectroscopy their various components, mainly the polyphenol components. Oleocanthal is one of those polyphenols. And we rank the olive oils from like very little to medium to high oleocanthal. And as it happens, there was a perfect linear correlation. The higher the olive oil was in oleocanthal, the better it was at killing cancer cells. Very, very clear. So then I figured, well, maybe you don't need pharmaceuticals. Maybe you don't need to get your drug in a little tube. Maybe nature has a better container for it, and it's already available for you.
So were you able to do any animal model experiments, or are you aware of other researchers who did them and those types of results?
Yes, absolutely. We've done a few, and I'm in touch with several other researchers that work a lot with animal models. In fact, there's a very interesting study that was just published. I'll tell you about it in a minute. But the experiments we did, we worked with mice that were genetically engineered to have pancreatic cancer by the time they're about 9 or 10 weeks of age. It's a well-published strain of mice that are just prone to pancreatic cancer. And we treated them with oleocanthal. And what we saw was that with the treated mice versus the control mice, they had way less tumors. A few had like 0 tumors at all. And we were able to elongate their lifespan significantly. So the mice that received oleocanthal, this was done with injections of oleocanthal.
Like directly into their stomachs?
Yes.
Yeah.
They lived longer by a very significant amount, something like 40%. So we were able to show a very direct correlation that oleocanthal can also inhibit tumor growth in vivo. Yeah.
And was the amount given the mice, was it a ratio that would be achievable by humans?
It's really impossible to compare. There's really nothing that's apple to apples. First of all, because it was injected, and second, because mice and humans are not the same when it comes to dosage. In every study, any pharmacology study, the doses that are given to mice versus humans, there's no correlation. One drug, you give it the same amount of milligram per kilo. Another drug, you have to half it or quarter it or give 10 times more. There was a study, a really interesting one that just came out a couple of weeks ago from researchers at the University of Louisiana in Monroe. And it was about prostate cancer. And they administered oleocanthal orally. They have a formulation of dry powdered oleocanthal, and they administered orally to mice, and they gave 10 milligrams per kilo a day. So that's a very, very, very high dose. That would be the equivalent of drinking a pint of olive oil a day, of a very standard olive oil, or even some of the better olive oils that would still be probably a cup or 2 of olive oil a day. But they achieved really great results with that. And they showed that the oleocanthal completely inhibited proliferation of metastatic tumors in prostate cancer. They grafted some tumors, prostate tumors, into mice. They let them take hold, and then after a while they excised the tumor. So they mimic the surgery in which you remove the tumor, and they waited to see what happens to any metastasis. and it's a very highly metastatic form of prostate cancer. And without any oleocanthal treatment, all the mice develop metastatic tumors in their kidneys, liver, lung, bones. And with the oleocanthal treatment, they inhibited something like 80% of these metastases. And that was with oral oleocanthal. That study just came out a couple of weeks ago. It's in Cancer's journal.
It's cool to see multiple studies sort of validating the same, same conclusion, right? That it has these anti-cancer benefits, and how much a human should consume remains to be determined, obviously. But I consumed a lot of olive oil as part of my anti-cancer diet. I still do, but when I had active cancer, I was eating giant salads every day, and I was making a mixture of olive oil and apple cider vinegar. And that was my dressing. It was just a homemade dressing with lots of spices and things. And I did not know at the time about oleocanthal. I just knew that olive oil was healthy, right? And so, and I needed some kind of dressing for my salad that wasn't store-bought. But I consumed a lot of olive oil. I'd say at that time, eating 2 giant salads a day. I mean, I was consuming easily 4 tablespoons of olive oil a day, and maybe even 6 or 8. I didn't measure it by the tablespoon. I just drizzled it on. But yeah, so that's pretty cool to think about. Now, another question: does cooking reduce oleocanthal?
Yes, but not by a lot. It's it's a gradual. It's a function of cooking temperature and time. I don't have the exact formula, and I don't know if that exact formula was ever achieved. But let's say you cook something, you saute it in a wok, for example, or like you roast in the oven. You put some zucchinis in the oven and you drizzle some olive oil. You put it in 400 degrees for 20 minutes. If I'm not mistaken, something like that, 400 degrees, 20 minutes, would reduce the amount of oleocanthal and other polyphenols by about 20-25%. So you would lose, arguably quite a lot, but there would be about 75% left, right? So if you use an olive oil that has no oleocanthal or no polyphenols, you would have 0 polyphenols at the end of the cooking. If you use an olive oil that had oleocanthal, you'll still have 80% of them. So that's pretty good.
Yeah, that's good to know. And my understanding with olive oil too is that it degrades over time, and so the freshest olive oil is the most potent and has the
100%.
highest levels of polyphenols. And we know a lot of store-bought olive oils have been sitting in warehouses on shipping containers for months and months and months, even years sometimes, before they get to the store. And so even if they started out with a high content of oleocanthal and other polyphenols, that has degraded over time, and so
correct. But this also it depends. So it depends on storage condition, on storage temperature, and time, of course. But it also really depends on the initial amount of polyphenols, because most of the polyphenols, oleocanthal is actually the exception. Oleocanthal is a very strong anti-inflammatory. Most polyphenols are very strong antioxidants, which are great for us, but it's also good for the olive oil. What happens to olive oil in storage, the fatty acids oxidize and they degrade. But if you have an olive oil that has very high level of antioxidants, for example, hydroxytyrosol, or my second favorite molecule, oleacin, those are very strong antioxidants, and they protect the olive oil in storage. So a high phenolic olive oil that's stored properly, which means at room temperature or a little below, I would say not above 70-75 degrees. Studies show that after about 2 years in storage, if it contained a high level of oleacin and hydroxytyrosol, it loses about 25% of its polyphenols. Olive oils that there's some olive oils that have very high oleocanthal, but very low oleacin and other polyphenols that are antioxidants. Those lost as much as 50% after 2 years in storage. So definitely, I would recommend getting fresh olive oil that's up to a year and a half old, something like that, in order to maintain most of the polyphenols.
That makes a lot of sense. I've never heard that before. It's really interesting how the antioxidants help preserve the olive oil over
Right. It
time.
makes sense though, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Um, and are there any other special molecules in olive oil that are worth talking about?
So I'm a big fan of all the polyphenols, and there's many different types of them, and most of them are really understudied. Most of them didn't get the spotlights in the way oleocanthal did. But those are molecules like tyrosol, hydroxytyrosol, oleacin, and different moieties of them. Another category of molecules that are very beneficial, and they can be found in many other fruits and vegetables, are squalene or squalene. Squalene are also really important. They're in the peel, in the skin of the olive, and you get them when you consume olive oil, and you can also get them in other from other sources. So those are really important too. They're very important for brain health. They're important. They're also have some role in anti-inflammation, in wound healing. So they're good molecule. You know, pretty much every molecule that exists in nature, and fruits and vegetables, and in these type of foods that we can consume, probably have really important benefits to us. So some have more than others, but pretty much, people always talk about superfoods. Just fruits and vegetables are superfoods.
I agree 100%. I'm so glad you said that. So, as you were talking, I was just thinking about, I've seen studies comparing whole food extracts to isolated molecules. And in some cases, the whole food extract was more potent, had more anti-cancer benefits. There was a synergy of all the
Mhm.
molecules working together. So I'm curious, if I'm curious if you did this, if you compared the oleocanthal by itself, you know, against cancer cells to the olive oil
Mhm.
and
Yes,
cancer cells, and if there was a difference there.
so I have this data is not published, but I can tell you that it took um, smaller amount of oleocanthal when it was delivered with an olive oil and with the rest of the molecules in olive oil with other polyphenols to kill the cancer cells than it took for purified oleocanthal. So I definitely saw that effect. Not in a huge number, maybe something like 50% less, something like that, which could be significant, but I didn't run the statistics on that. But I'm thinking more about population level studies. And you asked me before about the dosage. So again, in research and clinical trials that they're now recruiting for and doing, or in animal studies, when people test purified oleocanthal, the dosage are pretty high. I don't think any human ever consumed these amounts of oleocanthal molecules on a daily basis. But yet, we have studies after studies that show that higher consumption of olive oil is very health protective against many different conditions, from heart disease to neurodegenerative diseases and cancer as well. There's just recently a Harvard study, right, that showed that among like 80,000 health professionals in the US, that consumption of olive oil elongates lifespan and reduces many types of disease. And all of these people, they definitely did not consume enough olive oil to consume 10 milligrams of oleocanthal per kilogram per day, for sure. So I agree with you. I think in synergy with the other components of olive oil and synergy with a healthy diet, you probably get a much stronger effect and more beneficial effect.
Can we talk about olives, the whole fruit?
No, olive oil. That's a little sad, but it's the truth. So there's no oleocanthal in olives. What happens is the way you make olive oil from
Interesting.
olives is a process called malaxation. Think about it like you have grapes, fermentation, wine. right? So it's like olives, malaxation, olive oil. You crush the olives and then you let them brew or malaxate in a tank. And that's when the magic happens. Because what happens is in olives, you have the precursor molecules that are precursor to the mature polyphenols, as well as enzymes that can catalyze the reactions that make them who they are. And only after you crush the olives and you let them brew a little bit, the enzymes meet their targets, and those mature, fantastic, magical polyphenols like oleocanthal are getting generated. So eating olives, I'm not very familiar with too many health benefits associated with it. Especially, you don't really eat olives raw. You eat olives pickled or brined, whereas olive oil is raw. Olive oil is a raw fruit. It's just the fruit juice of the olive without any kind of preservation or pickling or brining process to it.
That is really interesting. I love learning new things. So, okay, so two questions from there. Curious, how long is the process after olives are crushed and then oil is extracted? How long do they, forgive me, the term you used, it was not ferment. Malaxation. So yeah, how long is that process?
Well, it depends what your goal is, Chris. Would you like to get more olive oil or would you like to get better olive oil?
Well, I think I would choose better.
I would choose the same, but most olive oil producers in the world would choose more. Yeah. So to get more olive oil, you let the malaxation happen for a longer time. And you would also elevate the heat because heat helps extract more oil. So that's how you get more olive oil. But to get better olive oil, you definitely do not use heat. You try to malaxate in room temperature or very close to that. And the malaxation tend to be short on a range of between 15 and 30 minutes. And
oh, that is not a long time.
No, and we play with that a lot. So this is super interesting for me. I can nerd about it for hours. But for different polyphenols, there are different malaxation times that are preferred. So some polyphenols are created, then degraded, and some new ones are created, then degraded. And it's all in that span of 15 to 30 minutes. So, and it changes from different varieties of olives. So good producers that really care about creating high phenolic olive oil with a lot of oleocanthal, depending on the variety of olives, they should really try different malaxation times and test the product and see, because what would be right for one variety of olives might not be right for another variety of olives. But most high phenolic olive oils are produced with a malaxation of between 15 and 30 minutes.
And so
whereas most commercial olive oils, like usually they do an hour.
Got it. Yeah. You know, it's interesting because it reminds me also of sulforaphane, which is this wonderful molecule produced when you chew broccoli. It's an enzymatic reaction. And it's an anti-cancer compound, and it assists in phase 2 liver detoxification. But yeah, it is created by enzymes that when you chew or chop broccoli, cauliflower, kale, the cruciferous vegetables, and so
is that why we massage the kale before we make the salad?
Yeah, you're supposed to chop it and let it rest for 15 to 20 minutes. So it's a very similar type of product. It actually can even rest longer, and it will produce more sulforaphane. And if you do that before cooking, it preserves it. If you don't chop if you chop the broccoli and throw it right in the steamer and cook it, you get very little. So yeah, it's very similar, just a similar type thing where you have this reaction that's created by crushing the food and enzymes start working and, chemical reactions happen. That is really fascinating. So, and I'm glad you said that about olives, because I like olives, but I rarely eat them because they're so salty. Right, they're soaked in right. They're shipped and stored and preserved in this salty brine, and it's just too much sodium for me. I just don't. I cannot. I can just take olives in very small doses for that reason.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I love olives. Some are less salted than others.
I've never had
often those
unsalted
Castelverano olives, those really big green chunky olive Castelverano. I think most producers in preparation use less salt. You should try those.
I would like to. And I can say I've never had an unsalted olive. So I really don't know what an olive
Right,
tastes like without salt.
right. So that's not a very pleasurable experience to taste olives without salt, or I would say raw olives. But this is definitely one way in which producers decide when to harvest the olives and when to start producing olive oil. You pick an olive straight from the tree or one that fell, and you bite into it, and it is bitter. It's like one of the most bitter things you tasted, but still there's different degrees of bitterness and different degrees of fruitiness, and that's how the producers decided to go like, yeah, it's almost there. We should probably start harvesting tomorrow. And just like with the malaxation, um, again, most producers, in order to increase yield, they wait quite a long time with the olives until the olives are very ripe, really matured. They turn purple and then black. Because all olive starts by being green and then purple, then black. There's no magic black olive trees and green olive trees. And
So the color is
the
really
longer
just
you
a
wait,
reflection of the age.
of the ripeness,
Ripeness. Yes,
throughout the
yes.
season. Yes. So the longer you wait and the more ripe the olives are, you get more yield, and you actually get more, I would say, sweeter, fruitier tasting olive oil, which some consumers just prefer. It just, this olive oil pretty much always have less polyphenols. Polyphenols are just bitter by nature. And as often in other vegetables, like bitter foods are actually foods that are better for us.
Absolutely.
Right?
This is something I've
Yeah.
said for years is that, in Western cultures, especially in the US, we don't eat bitter food.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of cultures around the world that eat
Yeah.
bitter foods.
And celebrate them. Yeah.
Yeah, and celebrate them, and they're just a part of their cuisine. And bitter foods are a part of their cuisine. And in the US, yeah, that bitter flavor is something that most Americans do not enjoy and or appreciate. And so they avoid
Yeah.
them. And those, like you said, those compounds that produce bitterness are incredibly potent anti-inflammatories, antioxidants, anti-cancer, all kinds of things. Yeah,
Right.
that is really cool to connect those dots for sure. So, where did your journey take you from there? Lots of olive oil research, studying tons of different brands of olive oil, finding ones with high oleocanthal. So what?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think then I made a decision that had to do both with um, professional career decision, but also a lifestyle decision. I used to live in New York City. I used to go to the lab every day. It was a very high stress environment. And I knew I wanted less stress in my life. I needed to connect more to nature. And I was really looking to move out of the city. And I was looking to do something in my career that enabled me to work, from other environment rather than a lab building. So I decided to start an olive oil company, and I started Cured. I import only high phenolic olive oils. Some are of a different brand, and some I make my own now. And with the idea of trying to educate consumers of the importance of that, and encouraging other producers also to follow suit and invest in making better olive oil and creating a market for it. Um, I think in the US, really the biggest obstacle for enjoying and using high phenolic olive oil in everyday life is finding the right ones. There's so very few of them. And part of the reason is that they're made in very small batches. In Europe, a little bit in Australia, a little bit in South America. In the US and California, just a little bit. It's really hard to find truly high phenolic olive oil. And so I made that my goal and my mission, to make it available in the US and to educate consumers about the importance of that.
That's great. Yeah, there's definitely a lack of companies that are committed to high quality or even the highest quality. And, in our giant consumer world, it's just, what can we make, fast and cheap, and, and that has led to a degradation of the quality of our food, for sure, and the quality of our health in the United States. Fast food, processed food, and junk food, right? It's everything's
Yeah, and
mass produced.
and the problem is, it's really because it's been like that for quite a few decades. The whole food agricultural system adapted to supply that need of fast, cheap, mass produced food, even in olive oil, because olive oil used to be this artisanal product that you would buy directly from the farm, from producers. I know a lot of families, even in the US, imported like barrels of olive oil from family in Mediterranean countries. And but I think especially during the 70s and 80s and into the 90s, it just became a game of lowering prices. I remember when I started into that business, people tried to tell me, oh, olive oil is all about maximizing the space in shipping containers. That's how your business should be. You should calculate the size of the shipping containers. I'm like, no, it's all about the quality of the olive oil. It's about the polyphenols. That's what I'm doing that. But it's very hard to find producers that would produce the olive oil in this time, because for years, they were not incentivized financially to create a better product. Buyers in the market, they're not going to pay more. They're like, all right, we're paying €3 a kilo. We're paying €2 a kilo. They're going to pay the same amount of money for olive oil. For them, olive oil is olive oil is olive oil. There's no difference. Yeah, maybe they think it's a marketing difference. This comes from Italy, this comes from Spain, this comes from Greece. It has a different variety name. They can stick a different label. But in the market, producers were only incentivized to maximize volume. Nobody incentivizes to maximize quality. And in fact, it's a story I heard over and over again among producers. They would say that always the first few days of production, they would start harvesting early. Again, those unripe olives, that's the holy grail. And they would keep that for the family. They would not sell the production from those first few days or weeks to the buyers, because they would pay the same amount for it. But they knew that this olive oil is better. They knew that this is the olive oil they're supposed to take a spoon a day. They didn't know why. They knew because it's, you live longer and healthier if you do a spoon of olive oil in the morning from the early production. And then the late production, they would sell to the market. So what I'm trying to do is to reverse that pyramid and incentivize people and pay more for that early harvest olive oil that is made from unripe olives that you malaxate for a very short time in low temperature just to increase the quality. And we pay for quality, not only for quantity.
Yeah, I think educating consumers is really the way to change the industry and improve overall food quality. I mean, it's just like organic food, right? When I had cancer in 2004 and 5, and there was one grocery store that's had organic produce. It was Wild Oats, or it might have been Whole Foods by then. I can't remember which brand it was now. I think they had been bought out by Whole Foods at that point. But yeah, that was like the only place to get organic produce. And so now you can get organic produce at every grocery store, because consumers have been educated and they realize this is better. It's less exposure to pesticides and herbicides and fungicides and all these kind of toxic chemicals they're spraying on conventionally grown food. So I can see that with olive oil. People understanding there is a big difference in quality. It's not just about which one has the best looking label.
Yeah, and I think especially when you deal with some very serious health conditions, and that's the time where you have to look at what you eat and realize that that spending money on food is really it would give you much better return than later on having to spend it on medicine, or as a society on healthcare. If we spend more money on providing nutritional advice and nutritional food and access to clean, organic, pesticide-free, nutrient dense food to the masses, we would spend way less on healthcare.
When I was sick, I had this realization, and that was there was nothing I wanted to spend money on more than the highest quality food I could get. Right? It became my number one financial priority. And people often say, you know, eating healthy is expensive, organic's expensive. It's a lot cheaper now than it was when I was sick, which is,
Yeah.
that's good news. But beyond that, it is absolutely worth it to invest in your health, in your body with high quality food. Like this is
Yeah.
fuel for life. It really should
Yeah.
be a priority, and you shouldn't be looking for the cheapest fill in the blank, right, on the shelf, whatever
I
it
know.
is.
Some people, and that's a problem because some people just cannot afford it. I mean, you don't want somebody to make a decision, whether to buy good food or to pay the rent or the mortgage. I'm actually working with a non-for-profit called Wholesome Wave. I don't know if you know them. And one of their initiatives is to write legislation that would allow physicians, doctors, to prescribe vegetables and make health insurance companies or even Medicaid pay for vegetables
I
for
love it.
people who get most of their nutrients from junk food. So I mean, it's
I'll definitely
definitely
link to
something
that.
that we need more.
Yeah, I'll definitely link to that in the show notes. That sounds fantastic. I'd love to learn more about what they're doing because, yeah, a vegetable prescription I think is far superior to most prescription drugs.
Yeah, in Greece, they did change legislation, and now doctors can actually prescribe high phenolic olive oil. Yeah,
Wow.
to for only, currently only for one indication, basically instead of statins.
Nice. Hey, that's
Yeah,
great.
yeah.
I mean, that's a start for sure. The fact
Hmm.
that they've got the research and that the research was substantial enough that they could persuade the medical authorities to allow give doctors permission to prescribe olive oil instead of statins. That's fantastic.
Correct.
Yeah, we need to bring that on over here.
Hmm. I wish.
Well, this has been really fun. I'm really thankful for your time, Dr. Limor Goren. Where can people find you?
Same. Easy, cured.com. The spelling is a little funky. It's Kyoord. It's pronounced cured because I believe in olive oil as a cure. And it's spelled Kyoord.
Got it. Keyword.com. And yeah, we'll link to that for sure in the show notes and some of the other things we've talked about. And yeah, again, thanks so much for taking the time to do this. It's been really fun and interesting and informative. I know my audience is going to love it. And they'll be excited about about tasting their olive oil. You know, everybody watching this is going to go go taste the olive oil on their counter and figure out if it isn't
Yeah.
spicy. If it isn't spicy,
Hmm.
it's probably
Yeah, and I
pretty.
encourage you, try it in a spoon. Put some olive oil in a spoon. Don't be afraid. Take
Yep.
a sip. Yeah.
All right. Well,
Well,
thanks.
awesome, Chris. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
I
thank
really
you. And
enjoyed this conversation.
thank you for watching, everybody. Please like and share this video. Share it with the world. We're just trying to educate people on how to be healthier. And this is one more way you do it. It's a small thing that could really have a significant impact in your health. Just increasing the amount of antioxidants, anti-inflammatory molecules, and anti-cancer molecules in your diet through fresh olive oil, healthy olive oil. So see you on the next one.